Welcome back to Top Cattle Sales, where tradition meets innovation. I'm your host, Kyle Dykes, and in episode 2, we have Mr. Kenneth Leiber, President and CEO of National Finance Credit Corporation of Texas, headquartered in Fort Worth, a 94-year-old company. Ken will share the history of the company, along with his expert insights on agriculture finance and marketing. I'm really excited to hear this because there's a lot of deep history there, so let's dive in. So, Mr. Leiber, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show and sit here and banter back and forth with me. When I told Dustin I was doing a podcast, first thing he said, and that's Dustin Valusic for all of y'all out there in the cattle world. First thing he said, "Oh, you need to get Mr. Leiber on." And I said, "Man, that'd be a great idea." And so I just jumped at it, and I'm glad you went with us. I really do appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank you, Kyle, and forget the Mr. stuff. It's Ken.
Okay, that'll work. Thank you, Ken. You bet. Well, I'm so glad to have you on. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this show this whole week and trying to prep for it and make sure that I do it right. But, at the end of the day, it's like the cattle business. You're just learning as you go, and you keep trying to improve over time.
That's right. I'm still learning to speak clearly, too, sometimes. I hope I say what I mean most of the day here.
Absolutely. Well, I know there's lots of great content to be found in the wisdom to come. So without further ado, before we get into, kind of what y'all do here at National Finance, tell listeners, a little bit about your background and where you came from and how you got started.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised on a dairy farm and a small cow-calf operation in a little town of Anderson, Grimes County, Texas, there. And grew up working on the land, and actually come from about 4 generations of people who immigrated into Texas and lived off the land. So it's been a part of my DNA for generations now. Being proximity to Texas A&M, it was a no-brainer to go to A&M, and it was a no-brainer for my father as well because he kept a dairy hand that way. And
yeah, absolutely.
I traveled back and forth to school for my college education, about 30 miles each way through there, and went to school and milked cows. So got out of A&M with a Bachelor of Science in Ag Eco, and went to work for the Federal Credit Bank as a credit operations reviewer in Houston, moved to Austin with them as they moved the bank, and in 1983 joined National Finance, which is a subsidiary of Texas Livestock Marketing Association. Joined them as vice president, and again been involved in the livestock side of the agricultural industry my whole life.
That's awesome. When you got to A&M, what was kind of your mentality going in as far as what direction you wanted to go and we've all been there in that point of not quite sure what we want to study. We just know we want to get out of our own little hometown bubble and go venture off into something. What was your focus when you were? I know you said ag studies, obviously, but
good insight there. One of the things that A&M changed me tremendously, because I went and I really took a long time to make a decision whether I would go ag business, ag eco, or whether I'd go animal science side. And I finally weighed on the fact that I had grown up in animal science, and if I stayed in production, I could use some animal science electives, but I really needed exposure more to the business side of it. And so I was thinking in terms of in the ag business model of learning more business strategy at a higher level than what I had learned growing up on the farm. As I went through A&M, I really got interested in the finance and the economics and the business law type side of the educational courses through there. And somewhere probably around my junior year, it started looking like, I really kind of look at the ag lending sector as an area that I would go. I knew whatever I did, I wanted to stay close to agriculture because it's my roots. It's where I was comfortable with, but I really understand the people in that industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's what makes it the best industry is just the people in general that we get to deal with on a daily basis.
Yes.
How did that translate back to the ranch when you started were there certain practices and things that you were excited to implement, at the farm in terms of the finance side or the business side? That did anything kind of change moving forward after you went through the different programs at A&M?
Yeah, if my dad was still alive, he'd tell you I talked about too many numbers and asking too many questions about cost and expenses and things. But it became it really focused me on the economics and the monetary side of the business.
Yeah,
there. That again, and agriculture as an industry, it is a business, but for most people, it's also a way of life. And so
right.
there's an economics piece that has to be workable, but there's also an emotional piece that comes into the decision making. And so I think that was one of the greatest things I got out of A&M was I learned some of the more technical economic side of it, and the focus and the ability to evaluate different options there. And again, as all young people, when you come out of college, you got to question things, and
Yeah,
the world changes, and it's changed a lot during my career here, but I find it gets harder and harder, not necessarily to change, but to let go of the old things that work
sure.
through there. And so I always say I can still learn new things a little bit, but it's really getting harder to forget things that I already knew and
Right.
that have changed.
Yeah. Well, and they say if you're not adapting to the inevitable changes that are going to come, no matter what you do, then you're not moving forward. So
That's
that's
right.
awesome. Well,
And I'm a firm believer in, you can't get better unless you change.
yeah. Yeah.
Everybody just, you hate change. You get comfortable in a role, but the only way to get better is change what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's awesome. It's great to hear your backstory and where all, you started from. And it sounds like you've been very passionate about this sector of the industry kind of from the get go.
Been fortunate to get started on the right path, and the Texas Livestock, the parent company of National Finance and National Finance, the organization. I got exposed to them through my first job because they were discounting loans at the Intermediate Credit Bank at that time. And so I got an inside knowledge of them before I got the call to be an opportunity to be here. And that was a life-changing event for me.
So you kind of had your eyes set on it from a long ways out.
From a long ways out. And it was, I guess when I got out of college, I always felt like I could go try in business, and my dad stayed in the business in the dairy and keeping the cows there. I always felt like, well, I can always go home,
right?
If I go out and try business today, but if I stay home, I may never can go out to business.
Yeah.
And so you got to be careful though when you leave home and think you might go back, because the world changes on you. And by a few years, I learned that, man, you get off on Saturdays and Sundays from the work in town. And that's like 2 days of vacation a week from what I was having before at 24/7 with the dairy.
The full-time dairy job.
Yeah.
That's so funny. And you hear that a lot across it. I mean, it's a lot of work, and in general, even in the livestock, across other sectors of the livestock industry, it's a lot of work. And moving into kind of what y'all do here at National Finance, and I know we'll mesh that gap here a little bit more, but that's, y'all are into doing business with those hardworking individuals throughout the cattle industry who are in it for the long haul, doing it full time, and believe in agriculture, believe in the cattle business specifically, and are here to stay. And that's what y'all's target and current customer is, and always has been over those 94 years.
Yes. Yeah. I say a lot of times this organization called Lightning in a Bottle. It was the right time. It was a needed time. 1930, of course, you had the recession, you had all the things. So the access to funds for ranchers was drying up.
Yeah.
The banking world, the farm credit system hadn't gotten started good at that point. And so it was a self-help type program that got started by ranchers. And so for 94 years, it's been an organization organized, supported, and owned by ranchers and managed by ranchers. And again, all we do is livestock.
Yeah.
whether it's marketing or lending side of it there. And you're correct there. Absolutely, our base is more as a service to those who are trying to make their living out of the business there.
Yeah.
And so again, that's kind of what my earlier comments about. It's a business and it's a way of living, and so we have to mesh those both together because the goal is to stay in business for generations, not for next year here.
And on that, you've got some generational ranches that have been around since the start of this.
Since the beginning. We have some that go from the beginning, and 4 and 5 generations. I've been fortunate. I've spent since 1983, so I've spent 41 years here, and I've had the personal pleasure of dealing with 4 generations in several families.
Wow.
Where you got to start with a pretty old man and have a pretty young one right now to get that done, but it has happened, and that's the reward you get, and again, the focus on the service when you bring the life of generations of families, and again, we're a family. Farm and ranching is a family business.
Absolutely.
Of it there, and it builds on the family, and it just hits all the integrity and the family goals and the living dreams that I had of what my life would be like.
Yeah.
Touching agriculture. I've been fortunate to maintain my hand in the production side from the ranch at home and stuff, but it's been wonderful with watching other people survive, not only survive, but thrive in this business.
And speaking of that younger kind of next generation and looping that back around, I know we talked earlier about how that's kind of how y'all have enhanced your involvement, like not only locally here at the Fort Worth Stock Show, but trying to invest back into some of the youth in agriculture and seeing how those people can come back to the ranch and how those kids can get back involved in these ranches versus those ranches just kind of dissipating over the years. And so that's pretty cool to see how y'all have done that.
Yeah, that agriculture has been a shrinking industry for decades through there in terms of the people, not in terms of the productivity and those things. And so, we have an aging population in general, but we also, particularly in agriculture, as we go through that. And so we're very supportive of trying to raise that next generation and develop and feed that passion of those younger folks that have that passion, trying to create a world where they have a way to make a living through this and a career and living through this. And so we've done through our marketing association, we do a lot with the quality count side, the 4-H and FFA programs on the stock shows, and we've served most of the major stock shows in the state by marketing their floor animals for the junior livestock shows.
That's great to mention because every time it seems like when stock show season rolls around, every time Dustin and I get on the phone, which I keep mentioning Dustin Belusik. For those of y'all that don't know Dustin, what's his official title here?
He's a vice president of National Finance.
Yeah. Okay, so Dustin is a good friend of mine here in Fort Worth, but every time I get a hold of him, either you and him or him and someone else from the office is always at the show in person, checking out animals after they've gone through the sale ring. And I mean, just to have that hands-on aspect as a company as dedicated as y'all are and as busy as y'all are, to be able to have that hands-on aspect and be on the ground during each and every one of those shows that y'all do and are involved in is really spectacular. We've mentioned National Finance as well as how that is a marketing co-op, owned finance company. Tell us a little bit about how Texas Livestock Marketing Association got started. I know there's a lot of deep roots there at the beginning and the growth of this company, and it was really set up in a very strategic way, I feel like, from what I've heard.
Yes, the purpose was clear from the beginning. It was set up by ranchers as a self-help program during a time of significant adversity in the economy and the ability to stock their ranches with capital from the banking sector going bad and the economic turmoil that was going on at the time. And so there was an opportunity to start a marketing co-op that could get access to some government program funds there in order to set up a subsidiary corporation to provide financing. And Congress' thought process at that time was that if we get a marketing co-op that markets a commodity, then those people will understand how to finance that commodity, and they'll be more comfortable financing that commodity, knowing what the prices are and knowing what's worth through there. And so the ranchers that started with the marketing co-op side. They initially looked up and said, well, this is an easy no-brainer. We have a marketing, we can set up marketing commission firms on the stockyards at that point in time. Of course, we'd just gone through, we'd moved away from the cattle drives. We were mainly on trains at that point in time to central stockyards deals. And so we started as a commission firm on the stockyards and all over Texas through there. And again, as a producer owned commission yard, commission agent. So we represented the sellers. There were also commission agents that represented the buyers, being the packing houses and stuff there. So we had a producer orientation from the beginning there. Then we also started starting the finance company after that, which was helped along by the government grants to a National Livestock Producers Association, which then went around the country investing some money in these credit corporations. We had to get local buy-in to get control of the organization, and so there was some funds raised from the local ranchers at that time, but the major capital came through a government program that took about 30 something years to pay back over time. So it was a long payback,
long-term process.
But the originators and the developers of it looked up and said, we need a dependable, reliable, competitive source of financing through here. It doesn't have to be better than someone else. It just has to be competitive with it. But what we really have to have is that dependability, and that we've lived through ups and downs. We lived through droughts and good times, and we need a lending institution that stays calm through all of those,
consistent.
Yeah. And so not getting in and out of the business there. And so they basically said, let's set this corporation up, and we can loan to a rancher for any purpose, but our requirement is that you have to be a livestock producer to borrow from us. And again, from a long-term mentality, it's as great a commitment as you can get from a lender.
Yeah.
Because again, if you have a stockholder-driven lender who's looking at return of assets, return on investment to a stockholder, the management of that entity is going to be tasked with getting the best return for those stockholders.
Sure.
At the least amount of risk. Well, everybody knows in the cattle business, there are years that if you own the cattle, you're going to lose money.
Yeah.
There are also years if you just own them, you can make money through there. But there's a definite level of risk, and in the bad times, what you'd see stockholder lenders over time do is say, let's shift our risk return model over to this other area of financing, and dries up. So that's probably, to me, one of the greatest things they did in the beginning of the organization is said, you're going to do this one thing. And we're the epitome of putting all your eggs in one basket and watching that basket through there. But you don't leave the industry that way.
Yeah.
You stay focused on it, and you look up, and you have to evaluate the management, and it makes you look at a long-term relationship.
Absolutely. I think that's really neat. I mean, it's kind of like a rising tide raises all ships. Since it's, producer owned, or the producers are the ones who initially invested in it, you have this dedication to stick with it and supply that financial outlet no matter the good times or the bad. So that's pretty cool to hear. Tell a little bit about what the original way. I know you mentioned the rail car system and getting them to this central hub that we refer to nowadays as the Fort Worth Stockyards, and what that actually was in that time, and how it, obviously it's no longer a place of marketing cattle anymore. But tell a little bit about what that supply chain was, or what that how that was structured, how somebody got it from the ranch, raised that calf from the ranch, how they communicated through the company, and then got it to say Fort Worth, or well, I guess Fort Worth was the original main hub for the whole state.
Yeah.
And so, tell a little bit about that structure.
Okay. Well, there's various stockyards around the state through there, and of course, Texas Livestock throughout its history was a commission agent on every one of them that I know of that existed there. But the ones that lasted the latest in Texas were Fort Worth and San Antonio. San Antonio lasted longer through there. But ultimately, our producers would ship their cattle to the stockyards. Back in the early days, as I mentioned, by train. If they were shipping their entire calf crop or an entire yearling set of yearlings through there, they probably got on the train and came with it to monitor it. But if they just had a few, they had a great incentive for giving the commission or consigning the cattle with Texas Livestock as a commission, because it was their producer owned deal, and they basically had a say. We had annual meetings, and the members elected the directors, who elected the officers, so there was accountability to that producer who may have sent his cattle and didn't come along. He still had an accountability to representation through his membership and vote through there. Then as we got into the vehicles and we started having more trucks and stuff, then we started getting the farm to market road development going on. That opened up for the local auction markets. And so that kind of took the air out of the stockyards concepts and took away a lot of the basic captured
a lot of the market share, if you will.
The captured market share through there. And so, and then that opened up the order buying business as well, with the auction markets to accumulate smaller groups there. And again, bumper pull and gooseneck trailers changed that little bobtail truck business to something else. Yeah. And then, then we got the feeding industry going in the 60s pretty well through there and grew. And so the evolution of that marketing continues today as we do that. But we didn't have the Texas Livestock, being over a large area, had a model that relied on the cattle coming to the stockyards there to us. And when it went to the auction market side, it was going to take way too much more capital than we had to go into the auction business. And again, having producer members in the Panhandle or South Texas or Northeast Texas or Far West Texas, a sale barn in one of those areas didn't help, but just a small percentage of our members, and we just didn't have the capital to put them everywhere. So some of the other smaller state organizations that were like us went into the auction business, and then some where there's still a stockyards are still actively involved in stockyards.
And so is that when the company decided to make that heavier focus on the finance side?
Yeah, I'd like to say the marketing side is a commission business, and so you only get paid when you handle a transaction
right
there. And my previous boss used to say that the man who invented money was smart, but the man who invented interest was a genius. There, and it's a
lot of truth there.
We say that tongue in cheek, but it is. But if you go to sleep tonight and you wake up in the morning, interest accrued overnight too. There, the difference is you have to collect. You can book it, but you have to collect it too. But the lending side became a greater focus. Not the main reason lending became a greater focus was it was the greater need.
Right.
There were fewer alternatives to the kind of committed lending that we would do to a customer, whereas and the reliability of it and the sole focus on keeping people in the livestock business, whereas the marketing side of it, different people have different options for selling their animals, and different buyers have different break evens that they're looking at buying. And so we early on in the organization said we're offering both, but it's a platter, not a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, as a lender, you want your producer to sell his livestock at the highest possible level.
Yeah.
Now, if our marketing company gives you the highest bid, we think you
Sure.
need to be smart enough to take that. But if we don't have the best bid for your cattle, you ought to be smart enough to take the highest bid. And as a lender,
very sensible.
As a lender, I'm going to say you're going to stay in business better by selling your cattle at the most advantageous price you can get.
Absolutely. So y'all have really become specialized. I mean, y'all are really the only type of finance company that's structured like that in today's day and age. I feel like.
Well, other than in Texas, I think we are, but there's a few of those that were organized like us that are still in business today. Through there in other states,
sprinkled throughout the other states. And now y'all still do business outside of Texas as well with clients that have either relocated or acquired other ranches.
We're if you live in Texas and you stay here very long, you go through a drought, and then so you got to go. I'd say we chase the grass.
Go where the grass is. Yeah.
So as we have customers who have gone to different states chasing the grass, they may buy another ranch somewhere. We see another neighbor. We have some folks that are back in the Southeast that send a lot of cattle to Texas for the Panhandle to either grazing or to feed yards and stuff. And so today I think we're doing business in about 8 states.
Okay. That's awesome.
Texas being primary. Texas, New Mexico, Colorado being probably the primary, the heavier end of those. But we got 8 states, and again, we got folks that have out of state ranches, but also we've met neighbors and good folks from different states.
Awesome. Well, that's some really good background, and that gives a lot of people insight of. I mean, it's cool to see the history and the foundation of the company, and especially also your background with them, and having that longstanding history to see the growth, see where things could potentially improve and change and things of that nature. The foreseeable future in the cattle business could be today, could be a week from now, could be a year from now, and it's ever changing. And it's neat to see some of the ways that y'all are constantly keeping a daily pulse on those fluctuations in the market to be able to maintain that foresight. What are some of the kind of common things as far as, either financial or production mistakes that farmers may make, and how they may avoid them, or how y'all have addressed them in the past?
So from a big picture side of it, I think one of the biggest mistakes most all of us, and I think it's human nature that we make, is when things are a certain way, we think they're going to stay that way. So when it's good, we think it's going to stay that way. And when it's bad, we kind of begin to think it's going to stay that way through there. And the reality of it is, in the cattle industry and the cyclical nature of it through there, that when it gets really, really bad, it's at the beginning of the turn to being good again. And when it's really, really good, the old saying of low prices fix low prices, and high prices fix high prices through there. And so, if you get out of step and you go with it and you react to where it is today, you're not managing for what's coming down the road at you. I call it, if you drive down the road looking through the rearview mirror, you're bound to have a wreck somewhere in front of you through there. And so, history doesn't always repeat itself. It sometimes rhymes, though.
Sure.
And human nature causes some of these cycles to do. But for the cattle business, one of the long-term things that affects the cycles is that on a micro approach, an individual producer looks at the same thing as neighbors looking at, and they both come up with the same idea to do it. So when prices are higher, it's like, well, I need some more cows, or I need to run a few more through there. But on a macro approach, the reason the prices are high is the numbers. But if we expand our if everybody else would stay still and let me just expand my production, it'd be the perfect decision.
Perfect play.
But if everybody gets the same economic target and looks at the same data and says, okay, let's all do that as a whole, then we create a mass change in our inventories, or we hurt ourselves with the supply side through there. So I think, one of the biggest things to look at is I've often heard some old timers tell me, when everybody's running, maybe you need to walk. And when everybody's walking, maybe that's, if you want to run, take off then through there. It's almost like trying to get out of step, but it's not just that. It's just looking at a model that keeps you, in my mind, in the business for the long haul. Every one of us wants to maximize our earnings on this next set of cattle. We want to make the most we can make out of this next set of cattle. But there's a risk reward premium. And so if you play the game to make the most money that you can out of a set of cattle without any kind of risk management, then you are taking all the risk. And so you might have mountaintop experiences of profits, but you could have terrible valleys of losses through there. And, one of the things that I just try to look at, and our customer base gets this really well, it's their livelihood and they're in it for the long haul. And so the profits they make on one year or next are very important. But the real important thing to them in their life is that they stay in that business for their livelihood, for their life. And that's their long-term ultimate goal. And so, we work hard with, after going through the 80s and watching the heartbreak and the losses that happened and the whole lending side, seeing the whole lending side and the troubles that the lenders had through there, it really scarred me from a position of saying, I don't want to see that again. I don't want to be involved in that. And so I really talk a lot to a customer who's having adversity to say, you can't make it all back in a day. And the whole key is don't let yourself get run out of the business. 41 years, I've never seen anybody run out at the top. I've seen them run out at the bottom. And again, in a cyclical industry, you might decide you're going to give it up through there, but you don't want to be run out at the bottom, because that is the absolute worst place and the worst financial result you're going to have from a lifetime of work, no matter what you're doing. If you're building on a career or you're building construction of a building there, what does it start with? It starts with the foundation. And so same thing in the business. Get your foundation, get your plan, get your operation consistent with where your strengths are and where your advantages are, and utilize those to do that, to maximize the potential of where you have the best strength of managing, and then manage it in a long-term thought process to say, I have to equalize my upside downside side of it. From a borrower lender relationship through there, I tell young lenders here that come in and say, once you get in lending for a while, you got to find something else to be positive about, because in the business world, as the lender, we're always looking at what's the worst case for us.
Right.
But I tell them, but that's okay, because our customers only want the upside, and they're in the business because they see the upside. Yeah. And that's what drives them to get up every day and work, and believe in it and go for it. And so as a lender, we can buy in and we can be a cheerleader on the upside, but what we got to be is a cautionary person on the downside to say, okay, I see your upside, but what if these things happen? Where does this go? And what does that affect the next year on? I mentioned early on here about the low margins have caused, greater and greater capitalization, which makes it impossible almost from a lending standpoint to loan at that kind of high leverage in this kind of risk environment that we have with the markets. And so, you got to kind of keep from getting out over your skis and getting over committed to something, so that you can stay around long term, and then be positioned to take advantage of profitability when the profitability comes. But you got to learn to play defense and hold on to what you can. And unfortunately, in our industry, sometimes you got to manage to lose the least you can lose
Right.
there, so that you can stay in business to where when that opportunity returns, and it will.
Yeah, there's a big barrier to entry in the cattle business right now, and it's the real estate, it's the land. I don't know the play for somebody trying to get into it and how that works. If that's even something that y'all see or have managed in the past, but what does that look like in terms of the next 5 to 10 years in the business, and how you envision new serious young ranchers trying to get in and be the type of customer that y'all are working with right now currently?
No, that's an age old problem, and it's sure been exacerbated by the increased real estate prices through here. That barrier has gotten bigger, not smaller, there, and that is the single biggest impediment, I think, to young people getting in, is getting access to the productivity of productive land at even at a lease operation size that is large enough for you to have a viable operation and economical enough for it to be viable through there. And so you've got to find a way to find that property, and so younger folks are pretty well needing to find something to lease to operate on there.
And is that something that y'all have dealt with in the past with other current customers that y'all have that operate on, I wouldn't say maybe a majority lease type situation, but maybe bigger than most?
Yeah, that's a good question. Early days of our history, first 40, 50 years of it, this company really didn't want to loan to lease operators there. The 80s kind of changed that
really
through there, because we got into the same thing. The land values of the 70s went up through there, and then the high interest rates came in on the land side of it, and the economics of it went bad. But then land started going down, and our lease operators' cost of doing business didn't get affected by the interest rate on their land notes through there, and so the decade, I'd say basically the whole decade of the 80s, in my recollection, the lease operators fared better than the landowners did.
Okay.
Because of the cost of debt service on the land, or even if they had their land free and clear, their net worth went down more, because they not only had to struggle in their operating side, they lost net worth as land values went down through there, and so that took away their leverage ability or borrowing ability somewhat through there. So today, in today's world, we're seeing that as a change, and again, we still have a lot of customers who own a significant part of their production land through there, but again, we also see customers, leasing grass and out of state, and moving cattle around at different places, and chasing the grass, and diversifying their operations so that they don't get caught in one bad drought area.
What is your outlook on the industry right now, moving forward in the next maybe 5 to 10 year span, for people that are either already are customers or are wanting to maybe take a closer look at this business?
Yeah, we are at a historically good time, and we've had it's been a pretty good run overall, unless you get caught in the drought situations in terms of the economics of it. But our economics are slipping a little bit with the inflationary costs that we've seen from the production side here, and that those costs rise, and they're sticky, and they hold at levels. I call it the ratchet wrench effect. It goes up and tightens, but it doesn't loosen when you pull back. And so, but we know from history that markets do. They go up. They're not on that ratchet. They go up, and then they fall back through there. And so, we've covered a lot of the inflationary increase with better prices right now, but we've raised the price levels, and so again, a 10% correction on a $1,500 cow versus is $150 versus a 10% correction on a $2,500 cow, $250. We don't lose percentages; we lose dollars.
Right.
And that's the same cow today.
Yeah.
At different levels, but the market change is $100 more downside or upside if it goes the other way through there. And so from that end of it, we see that. The other thing as you get old and gray haired and live through, and those of us who lived through the 80s and the high interest rate environment, I remember the light going off in the mid 80s to me that interest rates were so high that the interest rate on a cow was greater than the pasture bill to run the cow, and the pasture bill is needed.
Yeah,
but the interest bill doesn't add any pounds, doesn't keep the animal alive, doesn't do anything. It just keeps you paying the banker the debt through there. And so, one of the things that we're looking at now with these higher prices this year, and we keep up with it year to year, and we're probably 40%, 40% higher kind of across the board in the cattle market. So basically you're saying, okay, cattle cost 1.4 times what they did a year or 2 years ago through there. And then you look up and say interest rates that were 3.25% at prime back a couple of years ago before we started the raise there. Now we're 8.5%. So that's about 2.6 times the interest rate cost. And if you take the 1.4 times the 2.6, you're going to come to about a 3.6 times costly on interest cost on the deal.
Yeah.
And again, just utilizing that like a $1,500 cow at 3.25%, the interest bill a year had been about $48. $2,100, the $1,500 cow at 1.4 times is about $2,100 today. You look at that at 8.5%, that interest rate's $178.50 on a per cow basis. That's $129 a cow. That is just a factor of market price and interest rates. And so when you look at that $178 a cow on that $2,100 cow, you got to recognize that the producer who has to borrow all of that money to run that cow versus the producer who has his own cash, he's looking at opportunity cost for that, but the other one's looking at it as an expense there. And the difference in their break evens, we're back to the early part of the 80s difference of the cost differential between the levered operations and the unleveraged operations through there. And there's a significant difference of return, which will harm the higher leverage person as to their competitive ability to stay in the business versus the one that's not leveraged there. Tough thing to say from a lending standpoint because we make our living there, but it's a bridge that we're going to have to get through and get past. But but this is kind of the combination of everything looks good and the outlook is good through here, but we got to remember there's a cyclical side, and I think I said earlier on, I'm back to my deal to saying when you look at things and we expect them to stay the way they are today, when they're good, we expect them to stay good. When they're bad, we expect them to stay bad. That's not driving down the road looking forward.
Right.
There's going to be changes, and we got to see them through there. So as you look forward to it, I think the integrated world, we've got the best product in the world on the beef side that we produce in the United States. The outlook is good. We're in the right industry. We're producing food. People are going to eat. The downside, the other good side, we have the best tasting meat protein out there, bar none through there. And so to me, we're looking at that. It's going to bring a premium. It always has, and that's going to hold in there. But we're also subject to the broader economic extremes, be they in the U.S. domestic market or in the world side of it. So there are greater influences out there that we have to be mindful of. It's not just the production side of the beef industry. We're great on the supply side right now, and so at this point, from where we are today, looking forward, I think we've got to be looking at saying our risk is in the future is on the demand side for the beef product and the economic viability of the consumer being able to meet the prices that we need that need to keep us in business through there.
How does that play into the reinvestment in the price of a good quality animal now versus, we talked the other day about if you're just buying cows to freshen them up or some that are maybe a little later in their prime, when they get to these months, especially in Texas when it's hotter, it might be more expensive to raise that cow than the calf that she's got by her side. How does all that play a factor into making yourself reinvest in quality replacements? Because y'all are all that's the cool part about this office and this company is that a lot of people that work here are also producers themselves and involved in the cattle business as well. So how do you manage that from a thought process of reinvesting and maintaining quality herd moving forward to hang in there?
Yeah, you're right. We talk about it a lot because we're all comparing our thoughts, and one of the things that we've learned over the years is this: if we all agree that this is the right way to go, it's the wrong way to go through there. So we look forward to the diversity, and so the diversity of opinion of how to attack that model that you're talking about is good, and we all learn from that conversation through there. But at the end of the day, the benefit of that versus being in agreement with the deal is if we have different opinions, at least there's a chance for one of us to be right. I think, in the longer term, there's kind of I guess it goes back to me saying you get run out at the top. You don't get run out at the top. You get run out at the bottom. You got to be careful when you get in, just as when you get out through there. And so if you're just getting in the business, I don't know, this might be the beginning of the best opportunity we've ever had in the industry. But the history of my experience says we're at the top. We're way closer to the top end of what things are than the bottom. There's room to the bottom through there. And so, as particularly as it relates to, as you questioned, to the cow calf side of this business through there, you always got to remember that at the end of the day, at some point, your cow is your factory, and at some point, the factory is a living, breathing animal, and it will cease to produce. It's not like if it's the factory building, you got to look at it and say, well, the building's going to fall down in a certain year through there. So in this case, you got to be looking at your longer range plan of what you're going to do if you're getting in the cows, assuming that's what you're looking at as a production deal. If you're looking at just buying into cows, breeding them, doing whatever, selling them, that's more of a trading mentality than a production mentality through there. But if you're looking at the long-term production, I think you always got to look at what's the value of the parts of that cow, because if she doesn't die on your place, you're going to sell her for the parts through there, because her productive life is over through there. And so there is real depreciation in a cow there. We ignore it. We love it when we do our taxes, but we ignore it when we do our financial statements. And the reality is, if you pay, you can pick your number. I mean, there's cows trading from less than 2,000 to 4,000 out there today, with it depending on what you're looking for and what sale you're at and what you do. But if you look back and say, what's the ultimate parts going to be worth? Is it going to be like it's been in terrible droughts before, where it might be $500 or $600?
Right.
Or is it going to be like it is now, that it might be closer to $1,500, $1,200 to $1,500 for the parts? But let's just say it's $1,200, and the cow costs you $2,400. You got to get, there's $1,200 of depreciation that has to be assigned to the number of calves you get out of her. And it's not a cash cost, because you're looking like you're making money, but basically, if you're going to get 4 calves out of her, that's $300 a calf that you're dealing with through there, that you have to put against debt or down, because you're losing the value of the cow. You made the money on the calf.
Yep.
But the cash flow looks good. But the cow doesn't stay at $2,400 her whole life.
Yeah.
She goes down. But most of us all, when we do our financial, it's a cliff. It's only the ones that we're going to sell for their parts go down in value. The rest of them, if they're bred, they're all the same, and they're good. So to me, I think you got to look at that as you get into it today, and the risk. So if you're just getting into it, you got to be looking at your entry point and where you are in the marketplace, and it might be worth looking at delaying. Right now the cow-calf deal's in the driver's seat, no doubt about it through there. But that's why the cows are bringing what they're bringing through there. But you look at what those economics are, and it might be a time to delay on saying I can do something with yearlings or something else that I can hedge some risk
Diversify
management
a little bit
and do some better risk management on. If you're just getting in and say there's a better time, and again, if you pick the right time of getting in at the bottom of the cow side of it there, then you might say, well, this is the time to be aggressive, to get big into that. But for the most part of our customer base, you're going to try to hold on and to stay steady. And so you've got to maintain your cow herd and your inventory by keeping back replacements, or you got to make that decision at some point in your operation that you're going to raise your own replacements, or you're going to buy replacements. And if you decide you're going to buy them, you're going to struggle every year, because you're going to hate the trade at some point along the way through there. But I had neighbors down at home that said, yeah, and I'm starting to feel that way and fighting it through there, but said, you got to be careful. Old men get old cows, because we forget, that how old those cows are at times and stuff. But at the end, back to your question, I'm sorry I digressed.
No, you're fine.
But at the end, if you're in the cow-calf business, then we're back to the sustainability word.
Yeah.
If you're going to be in the cow business for a long time, you got to keep replacing. You got to find your way. You do replacements, whether you raise them yourself or you keep them on. But to survive the market variances on this thing, to me, the only way you can do it is do a little bit every year. And some year you're going to wish you had done more looking backwards, and others you're going to wish you hadn't done that through there. But you've got to maintain that herd. And so if you skip a year of keeping animals back, guess what? Your cows kept getting old.
Sets you back a little bit.
It sets you back, and you kind of got to double up the next year. You either have to double up, or you're going to be shrinking your cow herd.
Right.
And again, if Mother Nature forces you in your hand, you kind of lose choices and deals through there. So there's not a simple answer to it. Longer term, though, what I've seen in the last 2 decades, particularly, is that the younger people getting in the business have been more successful in getting to a size that gets to a productive operation with a stocker type program, because they have more risk management tools. And so again, when in the cow-calf sector of it, when we talked about that cow for that those values, she's the factory, and so you're not going to buy a cow that she's going to pay for herself in a year.
A holding cost, if you will.
There's a holding cost, and it has to be, that cost has to be amortized over 3, 5, 6 calves down the road, depending on what age you're buying into that. But you can't risk manage calf crops for the next 5 years today through there. And so, but the price of cows today are based on what calf prices are today. And so if you're buying these cows there, you can't risk manage that price volatility of calves and the cash flow in the future. There's no futures to go out. You could cash sell your cash contract your calf crop for this fall today. You could call yourself risk managing by reaching out a year from now and hedging on the feeder board, and that would be kind of a quasi hedge. But that's just 2 calf crops. There's 2 or 3 more calf crops that you got that you
still have to account
that you
for.
have the risk on, and that risk. And so to manage that risk, particularly from a lending standpoint in there, that has to take more capital, their investment, so that you don't get run out at that lowest point through there. Whereas if you run, do the stockers from the lending standpoint and from the customer, he can take on more number of head and do some risk management that can manage his risk down to the impact of a smaller group. But he can get the efficiency of a larger herd, but he's not taking all the risk on the whole herd, other than, of course, death loss and those things that go through there. But it's and it gets to the end, and he gets to liquidate, and he gets to see how his risk management program worked, and it builds confidence from the lender standpoint that he's managing his risk and staying within the bounds, and it's working the way he planned it out and did that. And so there's you can get by with a little less capital margin and into that kind of thing, because it's just that one turn, then you look up. The downside of that is you get the one turn, and if you lose half your money, guess what? You get to run half the cattle next year.
Try again.
And that model doesn't work very good if you lose money on 500 head,
mm-hmm.
and then you can only run 250 the next year. That means you got to have 2 winners back to back just to get back to where you were on your numbers. And so that's what I say. Don't get run out in the bottom of the deal. Is also get your operation suitable, and then get it where you can hold your number inventory, so that if you're losing money, you lose on a number ahead. You want to try to be holding cattle when they make money, so that you're making money on the same number ahead through there. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit of a spiral, and by the time you get back to even, it's another down cycle.
That's a really good point, and I'm glad you touched on that. Different opportunities for either younger or even entry new producers, or people trying to even get back into it, or diversify the operation that they're currently in. Just briefly, you mentioned the stalker type operation and the availability of tools to help maybe mitigate some risk. What are some of those different things that they can use to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, there's obviously you can use the futures to hedge. You can use options. There's the LRP, livestock risk management programs there that are an insurance product.
Mm-hmm.
You can use the video sales to forward contract. You can use someone like Texas Livestock to forward contract with a private treaty deal through there. And so, or you can run a program type cattle through there that has a buyer built into it at hopefully some premium that you get to it. So there's
like the all natural or the CAB and things of that nature.
Those nature of those type of programs that are looking for a certain quality and certain handling there that you meet. We just refer to them as program cattle all the time through there. But there's ways to mitigate that risk through there. But again, when you mitigate risk, you limit downside. Ostensibly is what risk management is a funny word there, because if you knew what the risks were, you wouldn't take it. There. You'd avoid that risk. But and risk management really means you're just trying to say, I'm trying to protect my downside through there. The problem with most of the risk management is that it's hard to protect your downside without hurting your upside through there. And so hedging is one that you lock in the forward contract and hedging. you lock in the price, so you accept that price. You love it if the market goes down, and you think you're smart. Market goes up, and you've left money on the table. You're telling yourself how dumb you were through there. You're second guessing yourself. But when you take that price, you're saying, no, this is good enough, and I know what I'm doing, and I know what my break evens are going to be, and I was satisfied with that profit. The market just gave more later, but could have went the other way. The LRP and the options and some of those other programs that put a floor in, those, particularly any kind of insurance product, just adds to a cost of doing business, which raises your break even, but leaves your upside open in an up moving market through there. So those are the typical ones we're seeing.
Well, that is some really amazing insight, and Ken, I certainly appreciate you. It's hard for me to call you Ken. I said Mr. Leiber just because that's what I'm used to, but it really is a pleasure having you on the show, and I really am glad we got to do this, and just really value, and I know a lot of the other listeners as well will value this content and what you've brought to the table today. I know I've learned a lot today, and I really enjoyed the conversation, and so I'm always looking forward to the next conversation that we get to have about this topic. And luckily it's here to stay, and there's always going to be something to talk about.
Certainly is. And thank you, Kyle. It's been a pleasure to visit with you. And I thank you for the opportunity to sit here and talk.
All right. Well, with that said, that wraps up this episode of Top Cattle Sales. Be on the lookout for upcoming episodes in the future. And that wraps up episode 2 of Top Cattle Sales, where tradition meets innovation. A big thank you to Mr. Kenneth Leiber for sharing the story of his company and his valuable insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure and subscribe for more industry updates and expert perspectives. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Top Cattle Sales.